Marriage is often a happy ending to a romance story, with no real discussion of what comes after. Divorce, on the other hand, is generally left for real life, because who wants to read about something that depressing? Well, to answer that question, me! I want to read about it, because in the story I'll be reviewing today, the moment of divorce is incredibly cathartic. It was a moment I had been greatly looking forward to. Ladies and gentlemen, may I present my review of The Remarried Empress. Remarried Empress starts with a brilliant tease of the moment of divorce. The first line of dialogue is the Empress Navier, our protagonist, saying, "I accept the divorce." We see Sovishu, the Emperor, look relieved. The mistress, Rashta, smirk. But Navier isn't finished. "And I request approval of my remarriage." Cue the entrance of the Emperor from the neighboring kingdom, Heinrich. Then we jump back in time to see how everything led to this point, which takes 80 of the 86 or so chapters that have been released today. So, what started this whole chain of events? Well, while Navier and Sovishu were in a political marriage, they had been childhood friends and were generally quite close. They had maybe become a bit distant, due to both of them being very busy with work, but nothing too concerning. Then Sovishu brings home a runaway slave girl, Rashta, he found on a hunting trip. And when Navier asks him about it, he more or less refuses to speak on it. And things start going south. His Royal Highness is baffled why Navier might not be happy with him bringing home another woman and doting on her. He also sees nothing wrong with complaining why his wife won't praise him and be nice and obedient like Rashta is. In his opinion, clearly Navier is acting cold and reserved towards him for no good reason, and he goes ahead and takes Rashta as his mistress. Then he asks Navier to find Rashta ladies-in-waiting, because of course that's what she should be doing for the lady who's stealing her husband. Anyways, following that, things continue going south, because as you can probably tell, His Majesty can be a bit of an idiot. But there's one bright ray for Navier. As the Empire has New Year's celebrations, delegates from several foreign kingdoms arrive, including one particularly handsome bird boy, Heinrich, a prince of the neighboring Western Empire. Heinrich courts Navier in both bird and human form, and thus the story proceeds, with Navier getting closer and closer to Heinrich and further from Sovishu, until we once more arrive at that brilliant moment of divorce. As a character-driven drama, one would hope the characters of Remarried Empress are well written, and this, they absolutely are. Let's take a look at Rashta as an example. Remarried Empress takes a fairly standard fantasy trope, the poor girl meeting the handsome noble and being swept off her feet. And it modifies it only slightly. It merely swaps perspective from having the peasant girl being our protagonist to Navier, who, in a more traditional story, would be the evil queen. And this allows for a much more interesting villain. Rashta, who would normally be the Cinderella of this story, is instead viewed as a homewrecker. And judging by the comments on Webtoon, which call her Trashta, she's pretty much universally hated by the readers. Interestingly, though, I don't think she's a particularly contemptible person. You see, the kingdom this story is set in has some questionable punishments for breaking the law. Namely, that you, and potentially your children, will live out the rest of your lives as slaves. Sure, some slaves are freed every year, but given that slavery is intergenerational, it doesn't appear to be a quick process. Anyways, Rashta appears to be a slave through no fault of her own, and is owned by an abusive master, Viscount Lotoshu. She gets knocked up and dumped by Lotoshu's son, has her own son taken away, is told her son has been killed, and only escapes from all that when she runs away and is rescued by Sovishu. Even after being rescued, she faces all the same sorts of classism and harassment that would normally be faced by the plucky heroine of a fantasy story. I then find it very hard to blame her for trying to make her new position as secure as possible. At the same time though, it's easy to hate her. Rashta has a talent for abusing her appearance of innocence to get away with figurative murder. She'll say the most offensive things while appearing to be completely oblivious, making her obnoxious as hell. She also is clingy, self-centered, and manipulative. I would applaud the author of this story for creating a villain who is, at the same time, both so sympathetic and entirely dislikable. Jumping now to our protagonists, I could spend all day praising Navier and Heinrich, as they're both well written and incredibly likable. But I'd like to focus on the romance between them, as that is easily the biggest draw of the story. My favorite dynamic in a romance is between a trickster and the serious type. But whenever I come across this type of pairing, it is A, BL, and B, half the time it isn't canon. Given that BL fanfic is not really my thing, though absolutely no disrespect to Fujoshi's, I was overjoyed to see that dynamic between Navier and Heinrich in this story. Heinrich flits between over-the-top antics, calculated ploys, and bouts of absolute adorableness, and it is a pleasure to watch Navier take it all in with amusement and some cutting remarks. The pair truly have top-class banter, and as they progress their relationship, a great deal of tenderness seeps into their words and actions. The pacing of the romance is on point. There's enough time taken to develop the relationship such that all the romantic developments feel earned, and at the same time there's enough progress to get excited about. I'm pretty darn sure I am not the target demographic for this story, but I nonetheless found myself fanboying over this relationship really hard. While I love the characters of Remarried Empress, the world they occupy feels hollow. There doesn't appear to have been much thought put into world building beyond it having a vaguely medieval to Renaissance Europe-like setting with a bit of magic thrown in. We know magic exists, but we don't really get to see how it affects anything beyond illicit meetings with birds. We're told Navier does a whole bunch of work on policy and trade, but never see any of the ramifications of her work. Court politics, while interesting, tend to be brushed aside for interpersonal drama. Hell, even the names of the two main settings are just the Eastern Empire and the Western Empire. That's just about as lazy as you can get, short of calling them Place 1 and Place 2. I get that the author wanted to focus most of their energy on the romance and the drama, but taking a bit more time to, say, flesh out the politics of the Eastern Empire or its economy would have really helped make the story richer. Navier clearly cares deeply about being a good ruler to her kingdom, and it would be nice to be able to more clearly see the subject of the work she cares so deeply about. I find it interesting that a story starting with divorce is the best romance story I've read in a while, but here we are. I have nothing but praise for the Remarried Empress's character writing, and while the world itself is a bit bland, you'll scarcely notice it as you follow the drama swirling around Navier, Rashta, Sohishu, and Heinrich. As I'm writing this, the first chapter of Season 2 of the webtoon just came out and I can't wait to see the rest of it. In other words, if it wasn't already obvious, I highly recommend reading this series. If you've already read this series and are looking for something similar, I would recommend Dahlia in Full Bloom, another series that starts with the end of a relationship, with the heroine moving on to a far better partner. Anyways, thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoyed my review. Cheers!